our presentation is becoming the conscious futurist that the world needs now. Obviously, your industry needs it, but I think that the world certainly does. What we're really talking about is how do we cope with the future? The future is such a vast, unknown space. It's very difficult to define anything because we haven't experienced it yet. And I want to give you a few tools so that it doesn't feel overwhelming. It doesn't feel like a foreign place. It feels like something we can get a handle on. Let me do a bit of an introduction about myself so you know why you're listening to me. And thank you very much again for joining this session. I know that there are so many concurrent fantastic sessions on it. It really is an incredible lineup that they have put together today. So congratulations to the organizers for that. Really fantastic. All right, so I am a professional speaker. I'm the Deputy President of the Professional Speakers Association of Southern Africa. I'm an author. I've written a couple of books. I also do a podcast. I am a futurist, and I'll explain a little bit more about that just now. But a futurist is someone who uses tools and models to look at the future, to make some analysis so that we can get a handle on decisions that we need to make and responses that we need to take. It's not crystal ball gazing. It's not guesswork. There really are serious models. I'm also an association executive. I am a little bit of an association nerd, to be completely honest. I love the fact that individuals can come together to define an area of industry or of work or of concern and co-create some amazing responses when they decide to work together. And that's what any association is. That's what any nonprofit is when we're coming together and saying, let's make a difference here. Let's actually define something that is different. I love that kind of space, and I like to see myself as an association futurist, helping organizations find ways to define the future for their sphere of influence. Now, I'd like to introduce you to a concept that for some people is a little bit new. I would like to let you know that you all are futurists too. You're here to listen to me today, but as a futurist, I'd like to tell you that you are as well. So in the chat box, I would love to know if you have ever thought of yourself as a futurist, and once I've explained why, let me know, like yes or no. Yes, you're going to consider yourself to be a futurist, or no, that seems to be a little bit beyond you, or beyond the possibility, the realm of possibility for you. I'd like you to start thinking about it, but tell me your initial reactions. My position is this: if you have ever thought about, planned, made decisions about the future, you are a natural futurist. If you happen to be parents and you have children and you decided to have children and you're setting them up for education, you're a futurist. You're thinking about the next generation and their educational needs. If you happen to have a retirement annuity, if you put any money away in savings for the future, you're a futurist. If you thought about your holiday next year, I mean, I know all of our holiday plans are kind of in disarray at the moment, but if you ever kind of plan for like a great big trip you'd like to take overseas somewhere, you're a futurist. We are all natural futurists, but we can be better. We can learn some skills, we can learn some approaches, and that's part of what I'd like to bring to you today. So in the chat box, anybody, tell me if you think you're a futurist. Yes, 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 definitely. Thinking about strategies for the future. Yes, definitely. Fantastic. That's really what I want to hear. Many people say, no, this is not for them. It's too academic, which it's not. Or it's too esoteric, which it's not. So I want to give you some practical tools. I do have a model, so we'll explain that now. So you're a futurist, but now I'm going to take this an extra step because that's a presentation today. You need to be a conscious futurist. And being conscious just means becoming aware of and deciding to do something more than. Rather than being a complacent futurist, you happen to have a retirement annuity, you can be conscious about your financial planning. You happen to send your children to school because it's the law, you can be more conscious about how you set up educational opportunities for your children. And that is the kind of thinking I want to introduce to you. And we'll dive into that a little bit more in a moment. The future can be quite overwhelming, so I'd like to give you a model to think about. And this is a model you can apply to any of the thinking, but this is how I've defined it for myself and the clients that I work with. We have a map, and I'm going to take you through the map in a moment. The map defines our place in time. You have a compass, and the compass encompasses all of the tools that we use to define the future. There's a whole lot of content in there. I mean, that could take days to just unpack. But if you're going on a trip to the future, to an unknown place, you need your map, you need your compass, and you need a guide. Normally a guide is someone who has been there before. I don't time travel, unfortunately, but I have paid attention to things so I can guide you in how we're going to approach this journey into an unknown world. But my own personal model in terms of my values is that I want to pass on that being a guide kind of mandate to you in your organizations, with the people that you work with the concerns that you take care of. You need to be the future's guide for them. Today is just a little touch of that, but there's so much more that I can pass on, and I'm very, very willing to have this conversation with any of you if you'd like to drop me an email, and I'll pop that into the chat box just now, but you'll also be able to find the details from the organizers. All right, so this is the model. So let us take this into the future. Where are we in time? We're going to dive into this a little bit. So here's my map. It's a map I've designed to kind of talk about where we are. It's just giving us a language and narrative that we can use to kind of explain what it is we're looking at. So we're going to dive in. This yellow line here is where we are in this current moment in time. All of us, I'm not sure how many we have here on this call together, we're sharing this moment of experience. But we all see this moment in time differently. That's why it is defined with a gem with many facets. Because although we're all sitting in this virtual room together, we've all come with different experiences. We all have different expectations. We all have other things we've got planned after the session. We have our own hopes and dreams, our own concerns or desires for the future. We all have something that we want to get out of the session so that we can take it back to the places that are important to us or to the people that are important to us. So we see this moment in time very differently. And really, as a starting point for a conversation about the future, that is essential. Again, we could spend an hour just talking about that. Because how we see this moment in time, our appreciation for the fact that we see this moment in time differently means that we need to kind of put our team together in a particular way so that we can take them into the future. If I'm incredibly optimistic about the future and I want to go and create and be innovative and do amazing new things with our organization, but everybody else on my team has been disappointed in the past, been let down, they have personal concerns with our corona pandemic crisis at the moment, their family have been affected, maybe there are some illnesses that they have experienced, job losses, financial strains, and everybody else on the team is really anxious about what the future looks like, then I can't rush ahead as a futurist and design things and try and drag people along, because I have to recognize the fact that we will come to this moment with different issues, and until they are resolved or addressed or at least acknowledged, we cannot go forward together. So as you are now the futurist for your organization, for your sphere of influence, you need to look at who you're talking to in this present moment in time, understand where they come from, what their hopes are for the future, and the more you can articulate that for everyone else in your team, the better the chances that you can define a future that is actually going to be powerful. So where do we go next? Now, if this is our present moment in time, if you go to the left of that on the map, you find some little towns. So this one is called Chevalinen. Chevalinen is a Finnish word for safe. If you look at that town, you can see it's surrounded by a really strong wall. It's protected. It is safe. It has one gate there. You can see the little gate there just above the inn. So anyone going in or out of that town has to go through that gate. The gate is kind of protected there by the forests. In fact, the whole town is surrounded by forests and mountains and the ocean on the side. They're very protected, very enclosed. They look inwards. Everything that is important to them is within those walls. It's a very defined, controlled environment. It's likely, if you think about a person that comes from Chevalinen, it's likely that not many of them have traveled outside of those borders. Not many of them have explored the world. They don't know what is going on out there. And that means that their perception of the outside world, their perception of the future is one that is scary, unknown. It causes anxiety, and they don't quite know what to do with that. There are a lot of people that come from that town. You might know people like that. You might be that kind of person. from time to time, who feels like you want to just retreat to a safe place where you knew how everything worked and it was all kind of predictable and safe, and that's something we sometimes long for. But some people also want to come from a town called Embellapi. We would love to come from this place. Now, Embellapi, if you look at it, it's kind of a bit more spread out. There's a little river going through there. There's trees and bushes. People in that town, because there's no wall surrounding them, they are a little more vulnerable, but they're also open to seeing what happens in the outside world. They recognize the changes in seasons. They can see summer, spring, summer, autumn, winter. They can see life and death. They can see the ebb and flow of the ocean and of the river. They see and recognize that things change, and that although there are bad times, cold, wet, snowy, awful times at the moment, there will be spring again. And because of that, they can handle temporary disasters. They can handle the cycles and the ebbs and flow of life a little easier. There's a fireplace in the middle there, and I love to imagine, kind of groups of people sitting around the fire in the evening, warming themselves, older people, older generations, telling the stories and passing things on to the younger generations, encouraging them to travel out and explore the world and come back and share those stories. Now, if you compare Chevalinen with Embellapi, and Embellapi is a kind of a Zulu causal word for origin or background, depending on which language you're looking at. It's where we come from. It's what we have, inherited and received and passed down to us. And that's where we start from before we go out on our journeys. But if we look at Chevalinen and Embellapi and we compare them, I think some of us would wish we came from Embellapi, that we had a little bit more courage, more willingness to explore. But to be honest, before we start defining other people and putting them into one town or the other, we fluctuate. We as human beings have that time when we are courageous and we want to explore, and we have those times when we feel like, oh, we wish we could just be safe. Just if only we didn't have to make all these decisions at the moment and things were defined. So maybe you want to pop into the chat box. Let us know, do you know where you come from? Can you kind of see some of your history and how that might affect how you see this present moment and how you see that as a journey towards the future? Just let us know. You don't have to tell me where you came from, but just let me know if any of those towns resonate to you in terms of your thinking. All right, so now that we know where we come from, the present moment, we have some history, now we want to go into the future, we want to explore. So let's see what the map shows us. If we go right to the other side of the map, we see a town there called Pasaran. Pasaran is an Indonesian market. It's a marketplace. It's a place where you're going to trade and buy and sell. It looks interesting. It looks a little bit, curious and adventurous. So maybe we want to go to Pasaran. Or maybe if we look a little bit further lower down, there's another town there called Elis. If you look at Elis, it's a little different. It's all emerald and gold. It looks a little bit more sophisticated, perhaps. It feels a little bit more exclusive. Like anybody could go to Pasaran, but not everybody's going to get a chance to go into Elis. You might be able to walk through, but can you stay in Elis? You're not quite sure. So it's more of a sophisticated, maybe exclusive environment that we might be heading towards, that we might prefer, and maybe if we want to be there, there are some people we're trying to keep out. And now we suddenly talk about values, and we're not going to get into that, but you need to decide what kind of future you want to define for yourself. What kind of future you and the people that you care about, where do you want to live? Because you get to define that. You get to go in that direction. Just to the side of Elis, there's another area they call valuta. And valuta is an Estonian word for currency. So again, we're talking about trading and marketplaces. So valuta is interesting. You can see there's a couple of little kind of settlements around there. I think there's about 3, 4, 5 different settlements. There's this big lush valley with kind of lots of life and waterfalls, and you just feel like there's a lot of energy in this place. And those towns are open to trading towards each other. They have their distinct flavors. People have kind of gathered together with people like themselves, but they're still willing to trade and share with each other. It's a really interesting, rich space to be in. Now, the idea of these pictures is to tell you that although things happen to us while we're on this journey, we could be encountering things like, up at the top here, dragons, the desert, other danger. We could be encountering monsters and hazards. We could encounter the things like government legislation and global pandemics that will undermine some of our attempts. But we get to define where we want to live in the world, what kind of a future we want. And that's really important to grasp, because for a lot of people who have not yet thought of themselves as futurists, who have never thought of themselves as conscious futurists, they feel like the future happens to them. Like this is something that we are victims of. It's going to happen with whatever we do. Tomorrow is going to come. But we really, the more conscious we become of the future, the more aware we are that we can define it, that we can create it. That if we see in some of the exercises, we do a scenario plan and we see that the future is in one direction and we don't like that, we can say, well, we're probably going in that direction, but if we don't like that, we would prefer to go in that direction. Then back here in this present moment in time, we can make some changes. We can make some policy changes, financial changes. We can bring people onto our team. We can gently remove people from our team. We can learn new skill sets. We can hire people that we need. We can go and research something. We can create another market. We can do anything we need to do now, so that in the future we end up where we want to be rather than where we were inevitably going to go. We get to define the future. We have to own that. If we don't, then none of these exercises are worth doing. So you're a conscious futurist. I want to introduce some of that concept to you. But please just remember this map as a picture, a model, a bit of a narrative about where you are. If you explain this to people, there's a lot more we could talk about. But somebody could look at this and say, well, yeah, I've come from Chevalinen. I've come to this present moment full of anxiety about the past, burdened with my history, and I feel like the future is going to be scary, that we're going to end up in a desert or in a graveyard. And I don't want that. And then using that kind of model or narrative, then you're able to say, well, where do you want to go? What kind of a world would you like to live in? And we start to define that. We start to understand how our history affects our future and how our picture of the future affects what it is we're going to create. So there we go. There's a map for you to think about in terms of that narrative. But let's see what it means now. If you are a futurist, what does it mean to be a conscious futurist? How are we going to define this? Where are we going to go? So let's start looking at the word conscious for a little bit. Conscious is to become aware of. It's to pay attention to something. Now, very, very much of our lives are spent kind of just in kind of stimulus response, habits, reactions, and then something changes and undermines our complacency about the world. And when that complacency is rattled, we become very uncomfortable because, we really feel like, tomorrow should be like today, like yesterday, but just better than that. More efficient. I should cross off more tasks off my to-do list. I should make more money. I should get more donations. I should help more people. It should just be like yesterday, but better, because this is the life I've defined. And I'd like to look back at the end of the year and go, wow, the end of the year is way better than the end of last year. But then something happens and undermines that. And then we have to stop and pay attention. So while COVID has been devastating to everything in the world, obviously, hundreds of thousands of lives lost, hundreds and thousands of jobs, livelihoods, businesses affected because of COVID. Globally, just so much disruption to all of our expectations, to our natural way of doing life. And that means that because we've been disrupted, we're uncomfortable and we're not quite sure what to do next. We become very conscious about every decision we make. So when we're in the house and we want to go out, first of all, it's like, are we in lockdown or not? Legally, are we allowed to leave our homes? That's something we've never had to think about before, unless you've been under house arrest, but that's another story. Now we have to be conscious about leaving the house, conscious about covering our faces, conscious about cleaning our hands, conscious about not physically engaging with people, conscious about the decisions we're making. We become way more aware of every little element of our lives because of this. Being conscious about the future means being aware that not just that the future is coming, that it's happening, but that there is a way to influence it, that there are tools that we can use, that we can co-create the future with each other by defining what it is we want, by exploring what could possibly be happening and saying, we don't want to go in that direction, we want to go in that direction, we can be much more conscious about it. So while we're using this, incredible time to become conscious of so many little things about how we do business, how we engage with people, how we take care of our physical health, how we take care of our mental health, while we're doing that, let's become more conscious about the future as well. I love the pictures on Google. If you go on Google conscious, they almost always come up with stars and brains, as if like that is consciousness. Like somehow in our mind, the more we expand and think about things, the more conscious we become. That is one way of looking at it. And I think it's quite an interesting way, because if there's any good that has come out of the pandemic, it's that we have now realized that we have a much larger reach around the world. Because it's come at a time when we've got access to this kind of technology, we can speak to people anywhere in the world and be able to draw on ideas and concepts and create relationships and create business opportunities, create funding opportunities, learn from people anywhere in the world, because we become more conscious about those opportunities. All right, now just to understand what conscious futurist is, let's go to some other concepts that we might know about, because again, these all kind of point towards the future. One that you're probably very aware of is conscious leadership. It's a system of leadership defined a couple of years ago, taught all over the world. Obviously, there was some, people who originated the concept originally, but so many people have run with this idea of being a conscious leader. And if you think about it, if conscious leadership is new than what was before, and I'm not going to go through a whole kind of leadership paradigms over the years, but think back to really old-fashioned leadership, patriarchal, dictatorial, under my roof, these are my rules, I'm the boss, you will comply. That was the kind of leadership we had. If you didn't like that leadership, you had to leave the organization. Now, conscious leadership is so much more about partnership and co-creation rather than authority, rather than control. Conscious leadership means talking about systems, how people engage with each other. We're responsible collectively for something, not just the boss is responsible, and I'm just doing what I'm doing because I was told to, it's my job. But now we actually get to engage. We have to pay attention to all the stakeholders, to everybody who's influenced, not just to a smaller group of people. So there's a lot more there in terms of conscious leadership than we've ever had before. There's more responsibility on everyone in terms of conscious leadership. The next part that we come to is conscious consumption. Now, again, this is something that is really interesting that a lot of people kind of engage with. When we go out to buy things, we're now much more aware of the value chain of how it got to where it got to. So you're going out and you want to buy a hamburger, or you want to buy a pair of jeans. And all of a sudden, we now have to think about the people in a sweatshop somewhere in another part of the world who have to work ridiculously long hours to make those jeans that are so cheap that we're buying. We're not just buying a pair of jeans, we're buying investment into an entire value chain. And there are ethical and moral questions, there are financial questions, there's money flow around the world that is represented by those pair of jeans. And a lot of people will not buy something because they will not spend their money on something that will reward or reinforce a value chain where the values do not kind of synchronize with their own personal values. And it's a very important thing to think about. A lot of people, when they think about conscious consumption, when they're deciding how to spend their money, they feel like they're voting with their money. So if I don't buy a product from this company, but I buy from that company, it's because I don't like these values or I support those values. So we're making that decision. And for a lot of people, that kind of activism is really important and powerful. It probably isn't powerful enough. We shouldn't think that just by not buying plastic, but by buying something that's recycled, that we're changing the world. It's not changing the world, but it's the first step towards changing the world. It's the first step towards thinking through everything that we're creating and consuming in terms of our livelihoods. To say it's not just this choice about this hamburger wrapped in plastic or this hamburger with, factory farmed meat versus free range meat, or meat versus, factory produced artificial meat, or, a vegan burger. It's not just in terms of the actual thing that we're consuming. It's about having that moment, that decision process, remind us of everything else in our lives and the influence that we have. When we vote politically, locally or nationally, when we get involved in organizations, when we donate our time or donate our money, when we support causes online or spread the good news about people that are doing good things, all of that kind of consumption of content or financial products, all of that is our stepping up towards taking responsibility and ownership for what it is that we are creating and consuming in this world. So that's conscious consumption. It's not going to save the world, but it is definitely in the right direction to make us aware of what we're doing and to help others to have that conversation. Sometimes it can be a bit frustrating. Sometimes it's a little exhausting to have these conversations, to have to make this decision. Sometimes you just want to buy the burger without having to have, an ethical debate about it. You just want to eat it. And maybe sometimes you will. So don't hit yourself over the heads because you don't make every decision, correctly or perfectly. But make sure that you're aware of that so that you can have those conversations. Now, the flip side of conscious consumption is who makes what it is we're consuming. And now we're talking about conscious capitalism. And this is a relatively newer approach to thinking about this. Now we're talking about the kinds of companies and organizations that are dedicated to doing good, to thinking good, to kind of non-profit work, to raising up opportunities, to take care of areas of responsibility. And even if you're talking about the actual for-profit companies where they're making jeans or they're making hamburgers, those companies that are conscious about how they produce things are making sure that they are invested not just in making a profitable product at the end that gets them money at the board level and for the shareholders, but they make sure that everybody, every stakeholder, every sphere of influence, every part of the value chain is honored by the work that they are producing, by the product or service that they're offering, by the money that they are receiving in exchange for what it is that they're selling. So conscious capitalism is much more invested in the entire world rather than just the profit. And you'll notice, you would have heard from things like, profit is the bottom line. That was old-fashioned thinking. And now we've moved along to, for a little while we were talking about the triple bottom line. Triple bottom line is profit, planet, and people. So if your product isn't taking care of your staff and the people who are consuming it and the people who live around the area where your factory is, if you're not taking care of the environment, the planet, if you're not kind of recycling, if you're not using, grey water instead of wasting, the clean drinking water, if you're not taking care of those things, you don't deserve your profit. Okay, so we have the triple bottom line, planet, profit, and people. And now somebody's introduced the idea of thinking about a fourth. So now we can think about 4 Ps. Which can get very, very complicated, full of acronyms in this one world. But 4 Ps, and we're now talking about profit, planet, people, and purpose. And I think the organizations that are on this meeting are very much those kind of purpose-driven organizations. So there we have 3 areas, conscious leadership, conscious consumers, and conscious capitalists. And now let's talk about conscious leaders. So conscious futurists, we're going to talk about conscious futurists, not conscious leaders. Conscious futurist is someone who actively thinks about what the future looks like. And we go through levels, just, like many of these kind of processes that we can actually move up and down these levels. So our very first level of being a conscious futurist, someone who is actively thinking about how they are creating the future. Our very first level at the bottom is survival. Now, very often when we look at these kind of hierarchies, like Maslow's hierarchy of needs and things like that, we want to aspire to being higher up. We don't like to think of ourselves at the bottom of the pyramid or the triangle or the spiral. But I would challenge anybody to say that they have not been at the survival level of thinking as a futurist this year. In 2020, we've all gone back to survival. We've all had the time where we've come into our house, we're going into lockdown, we checked the shops, the shelves are full, and if they're not, we've gone out and we've bought stuff. We have stockpiled. We made sure that we got our favorite things there because we don't know how long this lockdown is going to last or what it's going to mean, because we've never had anything like this before. We've all had to look at our finances or our business finances, our organization finances. We've had to think about How are we going to pay for staff, or do we have to retrench staff? I've got colleagues who are having to retrench staff in huge numbers, and it's incredibly painful. So all of our organizations have gone through that survival process. We've all had that kind of mentality of having to say, how do I protect myself and those closest to me that I care about the most? My family, my people, my organization, my staff, my team. How do I take care of them? And we've had to survive at that level. We've all been there. And I want you to recognize that, because some people, even if you are now moving up the spiral, some people are going to be there. And although we're going to talk about trying to go up, it is a spiral. It's not steps. It's not like you fall off a step and you fall down to a lower level. It's a spiral that moves up and down. You could have a health crisis. You could have a family problem of some kind. You could hit a huge challenge at work or in your career. And you can start moving down that spiral while you have to mentally process what is happening. You can't anticipate the future. You can't make all these grandiose plans, because you just have to come back to the absolute basics of surviving. Everybody who is struggling with mental health at the moment, and let's recognize that, that has to be almost everybody in the world, unless you're like really egotistical, you must have been challenged by what is happening in the world. That is a mental health issue. And for some people, that means moving down that spiral for a while to take care of themselves before they can move up again to start anticipating other things. So we've all been at survival, or we know people who are at survival level of being a futurist. The second part of the spiral is then being responsible. So once we know that we're safe and secure, we want to now be responsible. Who else are we responsible for? Who else can we assist? Who else is on our team? Can we reach out to them and help them? Can we see what is going on in our organization? What does the funding look like? What are the clients looking like? What do we need to take care of? What organizational systems still have to happen even when we're in lockdown? And I know we're at level 2 in South Africa, and things look a lot rosier, but the ramifications of what has happened this year is going to go on for many years. So now we're being more responsible, saying, okay, now we need to start putting things in place to make sure that we can sort things out so that we can survive into the future, so that our organization will still be there. We can still do the good that we're doing. So we're starting to look not at this present moment, not just at me. We're looking a little bit wider and a little bit further out. We're looking a little bit more towards the future. So if we were looking at this week, now we're looking at next month. If we were looking at this month, now we're looking at, towards the end of the year. So we're starting to raise our eyes a little bit and look a little bit further out. And that is being more responsible in terms of what comes next in our organizations. The next level then is invested. Now with invested, we have a little bit more mental space. We do not feel like we are in crisis mode ourselves or our organization. We are looking at what is going on and saying, how can we do something now so that next year it'll pay off? Who do we need to invest in now? What do we need to do? What do we need to research, find, add, delete? What do we need to do now in our organization or in our own careers or in our own lives so that next year it pays off, so that the year afterwards it pays off? How can we do something in our organization now that will benefit another organization down the line in terms of our value chain? How do we do something so that we can support those people who add into our organization? I'm thinking here, in terms of like if you're selling, if you've got services, you're trying to help people. Where are the people coming from? What are those organizations like that are referring people or clients to you? Can you train them? Can you give them some tools? Can you reinforce or re-encourage what they're doing so that when they're referring people to you, they do it better, they do it more efficiently, they help you out? If they understand what it is that you're trying to achieve, then maybe they can set up those people better before they get to you so that you can actually have more success in the work that you're doing. So we become more invested because now we're not looking at just how to survive, how to get along, how to make sure we're still in business next year. Now we're saying, how can we do this better? How can we make a better influence and impact on the world around us? Not just our sphere of influence, but now, the spheres that are touching us. How do we now influence other areas as well, other cities? How can we replicate what is happening here in another part of the country, in another part of the world? Where is there an organization elsewhere in the world that we can connect with and partner with, that we can learn or share resources or ideas or encouragement? We're becoming more invested. And again, that there's kind of two spheres there. We're not just looking at our own circle of influence, we're looking wider, and we're not just looking at the smaller unit at a time, we're looking further and further afield. Our fourth level of being a conscious futurist is the actual conscious futurist level. So now we are thinking not just how can we make this better for other people in our value chain, other people who are related to us in this industry, but we're saying how can we make a better impact in the world? And this isn't necessarily about imposing our views and our changes on other people, but having more conversations, passing that knowledge along, drawing other people into the work that we're doing so that we can share those ideas, that we can be enriched by what they're talking about. Even if they have opinions or ideas or value systems that are different from ours, how do we have those conversations? So now we're really proactively, uncomfortably looking outside of the world that we operate in and finding other ways to connect. It's a very proactive and active space to be in. It means that we're not just complacent with or satisfied with doing next year better than this year. We want to do next year radically different. Instead of just incremental improvements, we want to do something phenomenally different with the work that we do. We want there to be an influence that goes way beyond our lives. So you as an individual futurist, when you get to the conscious futurist level, you're not even looking for the awards or the recognition. You want to make sure that you pass on something of value so fundamental to other people that they may forget who you are, but it'll define how an organization, how an industry operates in the future. Because you have passed on, you have influenced, you have communicated that value at such a fundamental level that it actually changes the future. Not imposed change, not legislated change, but something that comes from people's hearts and souls. That is the influence that a conscious futurist has. Beyond that level, there's transcendent. Transcendent futurists are people who define things for generations, that change the world in different directions because of the work that they've done. All right, so here we go. We've got these 5 levels of being a conscious futurist. My question, and I'd love you to pop this into the chat box, is do you know where you are on those levels? Just to remind you again, it goes survival, responsible, invested, conscious, and transcendent. Do you know where you are on that spiral? Say yes or no in the chat box. And if you're happy with it, where you are, if you say, well, yeah, this is where I should be at the moment, and this is what I'm dealing with, say that you're happy. If you're not happy, then maybe you want to just make a comment about you'd love to learn more or grow or develop. So anybody in the chat box? Brenda said earlier she loved the map. It appeals to the fantasy in her. Yes, and I have to confess, I do love fantasy and science fiction, so it was a great adventure to play around with that. All right, Lindsay says, yes, invested, but would love to go to conscious. That's fantastic, Lindsay. Thank you. I know that I've spent quite a bit of time at the survival level this year. But what is amazing about the spiral is that we move up and down, and we mustn't bang ourselves over the heads about where we're at. If we can see where we've been, we know we can move back up there. If you're having a tough time, be good to yourself, take care of yourself, and then try again to move up. Brenda says, yes, I know where I'm at, but I'm not happy. We've been in survival mode for too long as an organization. I understand that. Sometimes we can be in a different place from our organizations, or where our organizations are affects us. Tennille says, yes, invested. But one of the major parts about being a conscious futurist is becoming aware that there are stages, there are places that we can go to. So I'd like you to understand that, and then we want to kind of move up and down. So let's say we want to become more conscious about the work we're doing. How do we develop this? How do we develop a bit of a mindset? There's tons of ways. I'm going to give you just 4 just to get started. The first is to explore beyond your circle. Don't just look at the people in your organizations, because you're going to get a very skewed picture. So Brenda said that your organization is in survival mode. Now, if you hang out just with the people in that organization, you're in survival mode, you're struggling with it, maybe you go home and there are other people well, we're all at home, other people in your family are also struggling with things, and you start to think that this is all we're going through, this is what the whole world looks like, it's terrible, it's doom and gloom. You need to look beyond your circle and see what else is happening out there. Where are there organizations or industries that are actually thriving during this time? What are they doing differently? You might not be able to do the same thing, but first of all, please know that there are some companies, some individuals, some organizations doing very, very well. And that alone should encourage you. This is not a blanket condemnation or end to everything that we're doing globally. It's not doom and gloom everywhere. So know that there is some hope out there, because that will allow your brain a little bit of space to say this is not the end, there is something out there. And then you can kind of be encouraged. But looking beyond your circle also means that you can try and pull in new ideas. You can play with new concepts you can learn from. So the second thing that we can look at in terms of developing the kind of conscious futurist mindset is to play with opposite ideas. So if you are a non-profit organization and you're service-oriented and you're trying to take care of people, maybe who are in a crisis, that's how your organization is defined. Go and look at something completely opposite. Go and look at a profit-based commodity organization that's actually making a lot of money right now. Look at what they're doing. Just see what you can learn from them. Kind of play with those two ideas. You're two very different organizations in terms of values and concepts and outcomes, but learn from that, see what they're doing. If you have a set of values in terms of religion or politics or personal values or insights, I don't want to say go online because you can go down to rabbit holes that would be really terrible, but encounter other people who have different opinions to you. Hear what they're saying, understand what their concerns are. If you're reading books, there's something called comparative reading. If you're reading a book on a particular topic, find somebody who disagrees entirely, who has the absolute opposite opinion to that book, and read both books at the same time. Allow your brain to be blown with the fact that people can see things, the same thing, completely and utterly differently. The more you do that, the more conscious you become of the people around you, the people in this world, the opportunities that are out there. If you follow particular groups online, go and find some opposite groups. If you're reading one newspaper, go find something else. If you're scanning, if you're looking at what news is happening in my part of the world, then go and subscribe to a news site in a different part of the world. What is happening in Malaysia, in Singapore, in Japan, in Canada, in Estonia? Find out what is happening in those parts of the world, because it'll help your brain to just explode in terms of opportunities and insight about what is out there. And when you bring that back to your organization, you will find new ways, creative, innovative new ways to take your organization into the future, just because you become more conscious of it. A third part is to consider the passage of time. It's very important for us to realize, especially in a crisis, that this is a moment in time that will pass. There will be a period of time, there will be a year when we'll look back on this. There will be a period of time when this will be in the history books, and we'll be talking to our grandchildren or our great-grandchildren, or they'll be reading our Facebook updates, because we don't have diaries anymore, but our blog about what we experienced during this time. One day this will be history. It's not the end of the world. It's just a very different way of having to do things. So understand that the passage of time allows us to cope with crises, but it also means the things that we invest now, small amounts of effort and focus now, will pay off tremendous dividends in the future. But they can't pay off in the future if we don't plant those seeds or make those investments now. So the passage of time is something that we can really lean into and take advantage of. And the third is to define your values. Understand what your values are. I'm sure for a lot of organizations that we're talking to, this is obvious stuff, because you wouldn't be doing the work you're doing if you didn't know what your values were. But the more we understand what our values are, the more we can articulate them, the easier it is to make decisions about the work we do, what we want to press into, what we want to avoid, how we want to do funding, all of those kinds of things. And if you understand your values, then you'll understand better the kind of world you want to co-create with the people in your sphere of influence. You cannot co-create a world that you want if you don't know what you want, if you don't know what those values are. So that's just four ways to kind of move beyond that. Just reading Sinette's comment here. Sinette is moving to and fro between invested and responsible, but would like to move to conscious. Fantastic. That in itself, just becoming aware of those levels, helps you to move forward. All right, so we're going to take a break now. I'm going to just see if there's any questions. Please feel free at any time to drop me an email, connect with me on LinkedIn. You can't follow my website right now because it's down, being redone, but drop me an email. I do a weekly webinar where I can share some more of these concepts with you, but I do love to hear from organizations like yourselves, and I'm sure that there's a lot of value that I could offer if we wanted to have a conversation, so feel free to do that. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing now as soon as I found the button to do that. Are we out of the share? There we go. Good. All right. So in the chat box, please, if there are any questions, or if you'd like to kind of turn on your sound and ask me some questions, I'd love to address any of those. Anybody want to share? We've had people explain where they are in terms of those conscious futurist levels, and then I gave you some ideas about how you could kind of move up and down. Are there any others that you could suggest? Are there anything that you would like to consider in terms of moving up or down moving up actually, those levels? So how could you expand your thinking about the future so that you can become more conscious? Anybody want to suggest any ideas? Lindsay's asked, how do you see the future of the NGO sector in South Africa? All right, Lindsay, that's a huge question. Valerie's added, and she says, what is changing the NGO sector? That's not something that, you can't just answer it offhand. I think the NGO sector is vital. It's incredibly important. I know that there's a lot of investment in this space because people need services that you're offering. But I'll give you this insight. One of the things we're discovering with associations themselves, so not necessarily the nonprofit work that you're doing, but the associations helping with different industry areas, is that they feel like for the first time they've been really validated in terms of the work that they're doing. It's like nobody needs their industry association when the sector's doing well, when the economy is booming, when people are working, when government legislation doesn't get in your way. You don't need your association because everything's just swimming. And all of a sudden there are these huge restrictions. So in the professional speakers are part of kind of like the business events area or sector. And we're finding a lot of our colleagues in that space who run conventions and conferences and exhibitions, and they put up, all of those expos, all of those, think of it like an expo area when you're walking around those huge venues with all of those stands there. All of the companies involved in that, all the people doing AV and the technical stuff and the lights and the sound behind the scenes and the sound desk, all of those guys are out of work. Professional speakers can get online and have a conversation, a conference, a workshop like this, but AV guys can't do that. And all of a sudden, those people, even if they're not part of their industry bodies, they're turning to their industry bodies, their associations, and saying, what are you doing? So I don't know from your individual companies that are represented here, but I'm anticipating that you could be having a lot more inquiries right now than you've had before. People needing to turn to you for help, needing to turn to you for guidance. And for some organizations, that's fantastic because you're getting, more engagement with those people. For others, that means you might, now have a funding challenge because you don't have enough finances to meet the needs of those people. But all of a sudden, people, organizations, companies, government departments are saying the work that NGOs like yourselves are doing, it's vital. It's vitally important. So you need to use this opportunity to really raise your profile, to talk about the successes, to demonstrate the value, because we don't just need the for-profit organizations. We don't just need the entrepreneurs who are making widgets and making a profit and having a good life. We need people who are doing, real serious value work for others. So make sure you're telling those stories so that you can demonstrate your value to people beyond your sphere of influence. Because the more they hear those stories, the more they will validate and value the work that you're doing. That is part of the story that we need in order just to stay relevant in the future. Anything else? Siobhan. What I find is the sector has added immense value through its ability to adapt in times when most were restricted. Very true. So organizations of any kind that have found ways to adapt, who have been, to use all the kind of the keywords, agile, who have been able to respond to diversity, the more able you are to do that, the more you're expanding your mindset. And that's why so much of this conversation about the future is about mindset. So we say, this is how we do business. This is how we operate. This is how we market. This is how we do presentations, and we define something, we've worked it out, and we like to do it this way. And something just comes and wipes that out. All of a sudden, we cannot do that way anymore. And we have to rethink everything we're doing. We have to rethink how we offer value. We have to rethink how we engage with people, how we get funding. And that, first of all, that disruption blows our minds. We all go down to survival. We all go, we don't know how to operate in this world. We don't know what the rules are. We don't know what government legislation is. We don't know whether we're going to go up or down or sideways in terms of restrictions. And what about other people that we used to do business with? Now they're struggling. So, how do we pull that kind of value back into our own organization? So we have all of those disruptions. And now, because everything is broken, we now get to create it. We get to define things. We get to find new creative, innovative ways of either doing the business or offering the value that we were doing before. So that ability to adapt is fundamental to how we survive and how we thrive in the future. But that mindset will take you way beyond just getting through this period of time. So if you can look at what did you go through, look at your team, look at your organization, where are you at the moment? Where do you think you could go in the future? What wins have you made in terms of responding to the current crisis? If you can tell the stories, the narrative, the successes of, so we couldn't do it that way, and we worked out how to do it this way. We couldn't do that. We found a new way to do this. We could no longer do that, and here's an innovative new approach, or something that was totally unexpected, or something that somebody in Malaysia is doing that we could try here. The more you do that, the more you expand your brain to more opportunities in the future, which means that once this whole COVID thing settles down and we get back to, everyday business, when we're just chugging along and we're not thinking about this crisis anymore, you don't want to get complacent then when business is okay or good in the future. You cannot get complacent. You cannot ever be complacent again, because there will be another crisis. It might be another global crisis. It might be another illness. It might be another terrorist attack. It might be another volcano. It might be something much closer to home. It might be something in your organization, in your team. We just hit 12:30. I'd like to extend the invitation again. If any of you would like to have a conversation with me about the future of your organization, if you want to tell me about what is going on, tell me about the survival mode that you're in, you are very, very welcome to connect with me. There's no charge. We can have a Zoom conversation. I can hear what is going on. I can share some ideas and insights, and I might have some tools that I can pass on to you that will help you. You're very welcome to connect to me. I'd love to hear from you. I'd like to thank Carolyn and Think Good and the NPO group just for hosting this. I think it's fantastic. Enjoy the rest of the sessions. And I hope you get to kind of tap into some of the content from the concurrent ones, because there's been so much good content shared over today. Thank you very much.